I'd like now just to come back to the panel and see if we can get a bit of discussion going here. And I'd like, first of all, to ask Bret Stephens to come back on the point that Robert Legvold made about how this is just Russia wanting to be heard. This is Russia as no longer on its knees as an economically successful country with a popular president, with its own view of how things should be in the world, and feeling that it really has the right to make itself heard and to have that, that view taken seriously. So, Bret Stephens, do you think there's something in that?
All countries have the right to make themselves heard. The French make themselves heard very, very vocally and often very effectively. The same goes, it's an ordinary fact of international political life. But if you are, say, the president of a struggling young democracy called Georgia, and it is the middle of winter, and you find that there have been two simultaneous pipeline explosions that are piping in gasoline supplies to your country on Christmas Eve, that is a very different way of making yourself heard. The same happens, of course, if you are Viktor Yushchenko and you are campaigning for the presidency of an independent country called Ukraine, which nonetheless Vladimir Putin and his friends in the Ukraine still consider a satrap of Russia, or excuse me, what they wish still was the Soviet Union. And so the way you go about dealing with Mr. Yushchenko is by administering a nearly lethal dose of dioxin. That is a very different way of making yourself heard. If you are the Poles and you are trying to export simply meat products to Russia, and they will not allow it on rankly mercantilist grounds, that is, again, a very different way of making yourself heard. And it is our contention on this side, we are not interested in making Russia another enemy. We wish, with all respect to the psychoanalysis on the other side, we, as Mark rightly pointed out, we ought to have common interests. We really do have a common enemy in Islamic extremism, but facts are facts. And when Russia, or rather this Russian government, makes itself heard, it makes itself heard by bullying, by violence, and by intimidation.
Robert Legvold, do you think that answered your point, that this is not just Russia making itself heard, it's breaking the rules and doing things in an extreme and damaging way that disrupts the neighborhood, and that must be something the United States has to try and counter?
I think that's right. The argument I'm making is not that Russian behavior is admirable in all respects and doesn't pose a problem, but I am saying that the major motivation for doing this kind of thing is as I described it, and often I think we overlook that dimension of it. My problem with the argument that's being made by the other side right now is the risk of oversimplification, the monochromatic picture that's being presented, which in its characterization of Russia carries a very high risk of generating a self-fulfilling prophecy in the first instance, and secondly, that is almost certainly going to be, would recommend behavior on our part that will be contrary to our national interest because of the stakes we have in being able to cooperate with Russia if we can move in that direction, even in terms of moving Russia domestically. One of the questions that we need to ask the other side in the course of the evening, what do they want to do about it? And what they want to do about it will begin telling you what the risks are of acting on their characterization of Russia as they present it, which is vastly oversimplified. There's nobody in this room that wants to, as Mark said, defend what's happening in Russia. Not only is it disturbing to us, there are a number of things that have happened that are utterly reprehensible, but it's not only a black and white story. I was witness to a conversation between Steve Hadley, who is our national security advisor, and the principal advisor to President Bush, and Vladimir Lukin, who is the ombudsman for human rights in the Soviet Union, a position that's appointed by the Duma. Hadley's point was, in Russia, I'm sorry, Hadley's point was that we wish well, we believe that democracy and building democracy is very important in Russia, and as a part of that, a free press is crucial, and we are very disturbed over the murder of Anna Politkovskaya. And it was clear that Hadley wanted a message carried back to Moscow on this story. Lukin's response was very measured and very careful. He said, we are deeply concerned about it as well in the ombudsman's office. As I said, this is an official. He's appointed by the Duma. He said that there is an investigation underway. He said, we're concerned because not only Anna Stepanova, but also 2 other editors for Novaya Gazeta, her newspaper, have been destroyed along the way. The investigation is very important to us. And he said the important thing is that at this stage, the editors of Novaya Gazeta, which is one of the more open and critical newspapers, are satisfied with the way in which this process is proceeding. And then he finished by saying that each year the Ombudsman's Office for Human Rights makes 4 awards for advancing human rights in Russia. And this year the Ombudsman's Office made that award to Anna Stepanova and to Novaya Gazeta. Now, that's not to deny all the other things that are very true. The crackdown on the NGOs, the closing down, particularly of the electronic media, the unwillingness now to cooperate with the OSCE moving into the elections, maybe even the suspicion that officials at a senior level were involved with the murder of Litvinenko. But that's still not a proven point. I mean, Lugovoy may be the murderer, but we don't know that it traces directly to Putin. And there are a series of these accusations that are being made tonight that are simply too monochromatic.
Well, Robert Legvold, let me just take, you made a very interesting point. What would the other side like to do about it? Let me put that to Claudia Rosett. Okay, imagine you were Secretary of State or National Security Advisor in some future administration. What would you be, or even President? What would you be? What policy would you be advocating? What should we be doing?
Well, with due respect, I think the motion tonight is not what we should do about the fact that Russia is becoming our enemy again, but is it becoming our enemy again? And so I'm actually not going to suggest a policy in reaction tonight, but I would like to just mention that from the opposing side, and again I stress, I wish they were right, but I urge you to look at what we are presenting and vote that they are not. We've heard about, and I'm quoting here, the cool peace, the challenge, the heightened challenge, and we've also heard the Saudis described as a good example of a country with which we may have disagreements, but they are not our enemy. That might be a good subject for a future debate. And I would suggest that what we're actually listening to here is the difficulty of figuring out what to do about the fact that, yes, indeed, Russia is becoming our enemy again.